Welcome to our workshop, You, Me, and We Too, Overcoming Bias and Harassment. And what does it mean for me, being presented by Rabbi Cheryl Peretz. We are pleased to present a program about Ziegler's Women's League Institute on Gender Bias and Harassment. This effort was supported with funds from our Torah Fund special project, the Creating New Spaces Campaign. Our special project, Creating New Spaces, was organized to equally fund two important projects: a Women's League study space in the undergraduate resident hall at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and this special training for rabbinical students at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, entitled the Women's League Institute on Gender Bias and Harassment. The Spaces campaign was started in 2019 under Margie Miller's administration. Our goal is to raise $200,000 to be split equally between the two projects. As of last week, in the 2024-2025 campaign, the Creating New Spaces campaign raised $10,616. So the total raised for spaces to date is $186,860, leaving a balance of $13,140 to reach our goal of $200,000. We are excited of our goal and would appreciate your support tonight by donating to Spaces. Please look in the chat for the links. You'll see one that says donate to Torah Fund Am Yisrael Chai campaign and the Canadian page, which is another link. So just go to the link, hit the drop-down menu, and make sure you donate to Torah Fund Creating Spaces campaign, not to the Torah Fund General campaign. Our Canadian supporters needing a Canadian receipt can go to the second link, which is also used for Canadian Torah Fund cards. Our dedicated Canadian platform accepts Canadian currency and issues a tax receipt conforming to Canada Revenue Agency standards. Our goal is to finish the Creating New Spaces by the end of this campaign year, which ends on June 30th, 2025, and we appreciate your support. In this workshop tonight, Rabbi Peretz will help us build the skills to overcome bias and harassment. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome Julia Loeb, our International President, to give greetings. Julia?
Hi, everyone. I'm so pleased to welcome you to this important Women's League program on gender bias and harassment. As Lori said, this program was made possible through the generosity of the Torah Fund Spaces Campaign, and it reflects our shared commitment to creating safe, inclusive, and respectful environments. A heartfelt thank you to Rabbi Cheryl Peretz for creating and bringing this program to us tonight. Your wisdom and leadership inspire us to confront these challenges with purpose and determination. Together, we have the power to make meaningful change. May tonight's program inspire us to build a world rooted in equality, dignity, and justice.
Amen.
Thank you for being here and for engaging in this critical conversation.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. I'm now taking over. Is that right?
And just before you do so, I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody. So you'll need
Carol's
to
going to actually
Everybody's
introduce Rabbi.
muted. Yeah. Okay. And I will spotlight Carol, but Julia, I have a question. Every time I spotlight somebody, it disappears. So I don't know if everybody else is seeing the person
It's
spotlight.
disappearing.
We can see Carol spotlighted.
Okay.
What you just did, we saw Carol.
Yeah.
But not anymore.
I know it's doing it by itself.
Well, we welcome Carol
Okay.
Simon to the
Okay.
screen.
Okay.
I'll start. Okay, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our friend, Rabbi Cheryl Peretz, Vice Dean of American Jewish University Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies. As Vice Dean, Rabbi Peretz will expand her role in senior level decisions and continue advancing gender equity and inclusion, developing innovative programming and teaching and mentoring rabbinical students, embodying the Ziegler School's commitment to nurturing the next generation of our Jewish leaders. Rabbi Peretz is a graduate of the double degree program between Barnard College and JTS, where she earned degrees in mathematics and Jewish philosophy. While working on her MBA in marketing, Rabbi Peretz also worked for United Synagogue before embarking on a full-time career in marketing consulting for Fortune 500 companies. Rabbi Peretz was ordained by the Ziegler School in 2001, and her visionary leadership, dedication, and innovative contributions have been a cornerstone of the school. Her most notable accomplishments include spearheading the relocation of the Ziegler School at AJU's Beverly Hills campus to ensure its continued vibrancy and relevance, advancing gender equity and inclusion through groundbreaking national initiatives. Rabbi Peretz's recent promotion to Vice Dean reflects the Ziegler School's acknowledgement of her exceptional leadership and the transformative role she continues to play. I know each member of Women's League joins me in wishing you, Rabbi Peretz, a hearty mazel tov on this very, very well-deserved promotion. And we're very honored to hear from you this evening.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really kind of you. Thank you, Carol. I am delighted to be here with all of you tonight and to be reigniting conversations that began about 7 years ago, really. I want to give you a little bit of background on the history of the Institute and what we've been doing. And then we're going to dive right in. So first, let me just show you quickly, because I know some people like to know the roadmap. This is our agenda for tonight. I want to give you a little bit of history, then I have some introductory exercises that I'm going to ask you to participate in, some of which are just to have perspective, some of which I'll ask you to put into the chat. Then we're going to base this in Torah, and then talk about how bias functions and how we overcome it, and the practical application of moving from judgment to curiosity. So I wish that I could tell you that in one, 75-minute session, we're going to solve all the problems of bias in the world, but it's not quite that simple. But I hope that we're going to raise our own awareness. We're going to ask ourselves some deep questions, and that we're going to perhaps come out with one or two tools that we can each employ to make our worlds just a little bit more bias-free. But first, just a little bit of history. So in 2017, when Harvey Weinstein was arrested, you all probably remember that weekend, and it was the spark of a Me Too movement in the world, which had gone through ups and downs. And at the end of that weekend, literally 2 days later, I wrote a note to our female identifying students in the Ziegler School, and I said, I just wanted to check on you. And I wanted to let you know that I love being a rabbi, that there are so many wonderful things that come out of this, and that I wish I could tell you that you're never going to encounter any bias because you're a woman. Obviously, that's only one area of bias, and we'll get into that in a little while. But I said, I wish I could tell you you're never going to encounter any bias, but that's not the world we live in. And that in my experience, putting actual physical harassment aside, which is very clear what to do, that it usually came in well-intended opportunities for connection. And that I wondered if that was something they wanted to talk about. And what I can tell you about rabbinical students is that many do not respond to emails, and I've gotten used to that. But that email, every single person I sent it to responded, except for one who was in Israel and oblivious to what was happening in the US at the time. And every one of them said, yes, please. So then I decided to contact I started talking about it more and thought, okay, we got to equip ourselves with the tools to help people overcome this bias. And so I started thinking about how to do that. And there were two steps that were monumental in this. The first was I wrote to about 20 of my closest female colleagues and friends who are rabbis, and I said, what do you wish you had gotten when you were in school, or what do you wish you even got now that that would be helpful to you? And every one of them wrote back to me saying, this is so great that you're thinking about this, and yes, and I'm so glad they have you to be doing this. And if you notice, not one of them actually had a suggestion of, here's what you can do to solve this. Because what it turns out, and I learned as I went on this journey, was that there is no canned way of training people to overcome bias, because we're not automatons or robots, we're actual human beings, and we all have our different experiences and different associations. And so then I started talking to women in other industries, and in particular, I spoke to a woman, Lori Levinson, who some of you may know, who's here in Los Angeles, a very well-known lawyer who was a pioneer in her own industry, and who teaches in law school and has been called upon for a variety of different speaking engagements and TV interviews and radio interviews and so forth. And then I spoke to someone in the business world, and they both said the same thing to me, which is, well, there doesn't exist anything because it's not canon, you should create it. So let's think about it. So we ended up creating a 4-part session for women to think about what is bias, what is harassment, what are the causes, and what are some scenarios that come up from which we can respond in a way that actually allows us to respond from the place we want to, not the place that our instincts took us in that moment. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And so I developed what I call it, like what we were really trying to do was to build the intuition muscle, to respond from the place of strength and the place of desire to continue our relationship, as opposed to from the place of shutting down a relationship. And from that, we used role playing and so forth. And that then grew from not just rabbinical students, but I started doing this for congregations and communities and organizations. And where I'm really proud that it found its way into was search committees for clergy positions. And today, because of what we created, every synagogue that enters the search for a rabbi is asked to engage in bias training to address what is unintended in the search process that isn't just about women. It can be about people of color or people of sexual orientation or just what I think is the sage on the stage, or someone who went to certain schools, or whatever it might be. And so that, as we were going along, we were then approached by the Women's League for the idea of what this Spaces campaign could look like. And in the early stages of developing it, we thought, well, this is about creating space. It's not physical space, but it is about creating space and creating safety for everyone. And so that really is how this institute got started. We had a little bit of a pause during COVID and afterwards, and and then our move, but we're really in earnest restarting this. And I think it can't be at a better time in this country or in the world. And so I'm delighted that I get to share a little bit of that training with all of you tonight. And then tomorrow night, we're doing a second session for another group of people as well. So I want to begin by thanking you for being a part of this. And I also want to begin by acknowledging that as we're gathering to do this training here, I think it's fitting that it came in a week where 4 young women have been released as hostages from Gaza. And I can't help but think about the amazing things those 4 women are going to do with their lives and the way they're going to impact people all around them because of the experience that they've had. And really, that's what bias training is all about. It's about saying, how do we look at people for who they are in the fullness of who they are and through the experiences that they've had, so that we can respond not from what we think they should be or should be doing or should be saying, but really from that place of seeing them as a whole human being. So to get us started, I want to ask you to think about a time in your life when you felt different from other people, when you felt like other people were treating you different than them. I'm not going to ask you to share this, but for a moment, I want you to just think about what happened, how did it feel, and how did this experience influence the choices that you made in that moment, or maybe even in the future? I'm going to share my screen because these are all really important questions to be thinking about. Recall an experience that occurred early in your life when you felt different from people around you. Then what happened? How did you feel? How did this experience influence the choices you made or make in the now? And when you're ready, this part I am going to ask you to share in the chat if you could, which is, what do you wish the other person would have done, would have asked, would have said, would have considered before just treating you differently? And I'll give you a moment because I would like to see a few things in the chat that you would have liked to see the other person or other people do, ask, say, consider. I know quiet on Zoom is always tricky, but I'm going to give you a minute to think and to put it in because it's such an important question. When you're ready, just type into the chat, thank you. Right, I wish I would have been accepted as I was, not as they wanted me to be. I would have liked that the person to consider the ramifications of her words in my professional and personal life. I would have liked her to show empathy. I wish the person would have continued the discussion with me instead of shutting it down when they heard about the difference. I worked in a corporate environment where men were dominant. I resolved to be stronger in my approach at work and in general, and have been since. Not sure I can say it, but it was in rabbinical school when I was told by a male classmate, sorry, you are one of the buchers. That means you're one of the boys. As those continue to come in, I want to tell you about 2 experiences that I had. The first, when I was 6 years old, we lived in a neighborhood in San Antonio, Texas, where we were the only Jews. And we were regularly harassed because of that. And I'll never forget, I mean, this is now many, many years later, I'll never forget when on Halloween, the neighbors, the teenagers in the neighborhood thought it was amusing and funny to pretend that there was a dead body on our front lawn that was dead because Jews had caused it. And my mother came across this and really thought it was a dead body. And it was with signs, and you can imagine the awful things that it said. But I really wish, and I would like to think that today, that maybe those people would ask a different question, which is, tell me about your Judaism. Why is Judaism important to you? How is it different than Christianity? Who are you as a person, right? Like, let get to know you as people. And that was, that stayed with me for many, many years. And I see others are you saying, I wish that the person would have acknowledged the hard work I had done instead of just missing my opinion because of gender. A colleague made a remark about my age. I was a new teacher during an in-service presentation by an outside provider. I would have liked the colleague to share her feelings with me privately instead of with the group. I wish she would have based her response on my knowledge and experience, not my age. And then lastly, someone says in the early 70s, I had to show someone I didn't have horns or a tail, right? Like, these experiences really hurt, and they really shape who we are in a lot of ways. And they stay with us. And sometimes they shape us because that's what we're going to specifically fight against. And sometimes, we feel like we're then looking at the world through the lens of how someone looked at us. And that's very painful. I'll tell you one other experience I had that's a little closer to home. So years ago, I was working, in addition to my work at the school, I was working as a interim rabbi at a local synagogue, and I was standing with the president and the search committee chair as they were embarking on their search for a new rabbi. And we stood at this big public event, and they looked at me and they said, we really need a young man who's about 40 with 2 kids, and that's who we need as our next rabbi. And these were people who had been trying to tell me for months that I should quit my job here and become their rabbi. And I looked at them and I said, wow, are you saying that, like, you don't want me to be your rabbi? And they said, oh, no, not you, rabbi, but anyone else. That's who they need to be. And I thought, that's what we're here for, to talk about. Because those people loved me and really wanted me to be their rabbi, and had no idea how that information that they just provided might be filtered, not just by me, but if they shared that with candidates, or if they shared that with their search committee, or if they shared that with their board, or if they shared that with their community, how it would actually play out, of who might apply to that job, who might get that job, what success they could have in the community. And it ended up being really, I think, eye-opening for everyone. And here's the good news or bad news. The good news is we can all do this work. And the bad news is we've all been on the receiving end of this kind of unintended bias, but we've also probably been on the giving end of it without realizing it. So I want to ask you, if I could, I'm going to share my screen again, because I'm going to ask you to do another little exercise that's really important. So this is your little chart. You can make it on your own, but put your name, and then across the top, the types of things that we know that people unintendedly show bias around: gender, race, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, education level, religious life, marital status, if they're an extrovert or introvert. You can add to the list if you want. But as you make this list, what I want you to do is I want you to think about the 5 to 6 people who are your most trusted people in the world, who are not your family members, friends, coworkers, whatever it might be. And I want you, you're not going to turn this in, so don't worry. I want you to write their name, and then in the columns, I want you to put a little check or a dot in each one where they are similar to you. where the dimension, like their education level is similar to yours, their religion is similar to yours, their sexual orientation is, or marital status is similar to yours. And I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. I'm taking this off the screen, but just feel free to let me know if you need it back up for a minute.
Could you put it back up, please?
Sure. And I'll just give you a couple minutes here to finish up. So I'm curious what you noticed, or if you were surprised by what you found about the people you put down and how they are or aren't similar to you. And you could put that in the chat, or I can't see right now because I have this sharing, but you can unmute yourself and perhaps share if you want. I know we're a little bit of a big group, but it's always better when we could talk to each other and not just at each other. So curious what you found.
Rabbi Peretz, basically,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
as Jeanette posted in the people that we tend to associate, probably our closest friends, tend to have at least 50%, if not more, check marks, like that we're similar in all those aspects.
Yeah. By show of hands, for those of you on screen, how many of you found that the people you were writing down, by and large, share a good number of the same characteristics with you? Yeah, right. So that's pretty. You know, I see a couple of hands, Lori, and I don't know why my hand went up, but Lori, go ahead.
Same age, same religion, same marital status.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It did surprise me.
So, right, I mean, we know it and we're still surprised by it, right? Those are the people we meet that we, you know, tend to have things in common with, that we find ourselves gravitating towards. And yet, even for people who I know love people and open yourselves up to so many different people, it's a little bit surprising to realize, oh, wow, like my peeps are like me. And what that means in terms of how we view other people, not always, but can sometimes filter through that lens, right? Yeah, I mean, Jeanette, thank you, right? People I've known forever and I have, you know, these long-standing connections with. And sometimes that means when someone doesn't come from that circle or doesn't have that characteristic, I'm less likely to feel inclined towards them. I'm less likely to think that they understand who I am or what I need. And that, my friends, is a little bit what is unintended bias is all about. So I want to pause here to look at a story from the Torah, one of my favorite stories. Some of you probably know this story, but it's amazing because it's only 8 verses, but it has so much to tell us in 8 verses. This is the story of the daughters of Zelophehad, right? The daughters of Zelophehad, who are from the Manassite families, and they're the son of Hefer, the son of Gilad, the son of Machir. They're telling us there's a long lineage here. And these daughters had names, and my guess is those of us who knew the story, very few of us know their names. But their names were Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, and Tirzah. And they go before Moses and Eleazar the priest and the chieftains and the whole assembly at the tent of meeting. And they said, here's the deal. You all are here to appropriate land, and we have a problem. I'm looking at verse 3. Our father died in the wilderness during the wandering. He wasn't one of the people of the of Korach's faction who was banded together against God, but he died. They say of his own sin, meaning he died along the way. He died of his own accounting with God, and he has no sons. And you can't let our father's name be lost to his clan just because he had no sons. So please give us a holding among our father's kinsmen, right? Meaning that give us the land that was meant for our father's family. And the amazing thing here is, as you probably know, that the inheritance of land was done through the men of the tribe. Right? Now, if you're Moses and these women are coming to you and saying this, how might you respond? Again, you can unmute if you want. We'll take 2 or 3 comments. Right? These women come in the front of the tent of meeting, in front of the entire community, and are challenging the law that you're trying to actually make manifest in the world. How might you respond? Anybody? No ideas? Yeah, please, Shelley. Thank you.
Well, I would probably have to revise the law because
Okay.
they don't have any brothers. And if they married and if he gave their property to their husbands, it would leave that tribe, it would leave their family, and it would diminish the size of their group.
Amazing, amazing, right? So Moses might have made an instant decision himself to say, wow, this logic makes total sense and I need to do this. That's one possibility. Jennifer, go ahead.
Yeah, I think he would have said, gee, I understand your plight, and that's such a pity, and that's the way it goes.
Okay, so he might have said, right, like that's just the law and I can't do anything about it, right? Absolutely. Great. Any other? Yeah, Mimi, hi.
Hi, good to see you.
You too.
This happens to be one of my favorite portions in the Bible, in the Torah, mainly because I'm a single child and female. So,
Mhm.
you know, it has its own ramifications. But even Moses went to a higher authority. He didn't make the
Right.
decision himself. He needed to go to God to get the okay.
Great. So Mimi's already jumping to the next verse, which is
Oh, I'm
great,
sorry.
right? No, don't apologize. I love it. So she's saying, right, like Moses saying, I don't know what to do with this. I got to go get help. I got to phone a friend, and that friend happens to be God, right? Because remember, Moses is caught now in a conundrum because he's given the law by God, and now he has to figure out what to do when, in fact, these women who are coming in front of the people and saying, "What about us? What do we do with that?" Right? And so let's take a look at what happens, right? Because in the next verse, verse 6, right? It says, Vayomer Adonai al Moshe lemor, right? Like Moses goes to the God, right? He brings, verse 5, Vayakrev Moshe et mishpatan lifnei Adonai. Moses brings close their question, their justice, their case to God. And God says to Moses, Pen benot zlochad dovrot, that it is true, or it is so, what the daughters of Zlochad are saying. It's just, and you should in fact give them a hereditary holding of their father's kinsmen. And not only that, but speak to the Israelite people as follows: if a man dies without leaving a son, you shall transfer his property to the daughters. So in other words, that what happens is that God then says to Moses, not only are these 5 women right about their particular case, but we're now going to change the law because of this. And if a man dies without children, then his daughter should inherit the law, right? That's pretty remarkable. I know it might not seem like it in today's world, but in the ancient world, that this was so revolutionary, and that it was brought by people who weren't really part of the discussion publicly in a lot of ways, right? So imagine if Moses's response had been, "You're just women, you can't do this," or "Nope, you know, like the world was created for men and not women," or even to a certain extent, I hear you and there's nothing I can do, says like, well, it still leaves the feeling like I don't matter. And the commentators focus on 4 words here. Ken benot Zlofchad Dovrot. It's true, or it's just what the daughters of Zlofchad say, meaning it's right, it's correct. But what I want to ask you is, what is it that they were able to see that Moses couldn't see? Because that's, I think, at the core of what we're trying to ask about how we overcome our own biases. What could they see that Moses couldn't see? Anybody? Jennifer, go ahead.
That their family name would be erased.
Okay, they could see that their own family name would be erased. Good. Any others?
They could see that they weren't going to have a family place.
Great. They could see that they were going to be erased. What else? Yes, Susan.
Just because they were women didn't mean they didn't have as much of a right or entitlement to their father's, he was their father. They were born from him, and why shouldn't they, just because they were female instead of male, be entitled to carry on their family going forward?
Great, and maybe even lift that higher, right? There may be a social structure here, but that social structure isn't accounting for every aspect of justice, and that's a challenge for us, right? If this is about justice. And in fact, Rashi says, right, that Shira'ata Einan Machalo Ra'ata Eino Shel Moshe, that their eyes could see something that Moses's eyes couldn't see. They could literally see something in the law that Moses couldn't see, and that what they were able to see allowed them to share with Moses their perspective, their experience, their feelings, their understanding, and maybe even the shortcoming of the law itself, right? This is not designed tonight to become political, but I think a lot about Dick Cheney, who spoke very eloquently over the years about how his perception on what should happen with the GLBTQ community changed when his own daughter shared her experience with him. Right? There's a statement of law, there's a statement of social norms, there's a statement of what we think we understand. And then when someone is able to help us see that, wait, maybe there's another way to look at this, it can really change how we understand it, how we interpret it, what we ask for, and maybe even how we ourselves re-understand in a way that is inclusive of the person that we thought was outside the boundaries. We're seeing this all over our society. So I don't want to leave this thinking that this is just about gender or this is just about sexuality, right? It's about color and it's about education levels, and it's about, you name it. Like, I want to ask you again, I'm not going to ask you to put it in a chat or anything, but I want you to really ask yourself, what are the things that I make assumptions about? What are the places where I might judge people before I know more about them? Because it turns out that bias functions to actually help us with things that we're hardwired for. We are hardwired to sense potential threats. So if something feels like on an emotional level that it's somehow going to threaten me, then that can be challenging, right? As women, we saw this a lot as we continue to see now the conversation amongst women who choose to stay at home and women who either have to work or choose to have a career, and the judgments around what kind of mother you are, what kind of employee you are, right? That's, none of us means to be judging each other, but we make assumptions because we're hardwired to sense the potential threat to the identity that I might hold myself. It also turns out that we are, as human beings, I'm not just talking about as women to women, as human beings, we actually have automatic responses. Remember, going back to as children, when you touch something hot, there's an automatic response, and that stays with you. But sometimes learned responses become just as automatic as the hardwiring automatic responses, right? So I talk about this all the time. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, in the late 70s and early 80s, and at that time, where we lived in the city, there was no real integration. The Black and brown people lived on the south side of town. The Jews lived on the north and northeast side of town. And there was a way in which that unintended segregation left me with a feeling that I wasn't safe around Black or brown people. But nobody ever told me I wasn't safe around Black or brown people. Nobody ever meant to say that we weren't safe around Black or brown people. But there was a way in which, because there was like that differences and that separation, the responses were, oh, if there's someone coming to me on the same side of the street, I need to like go to the other side, right? Because I was in danger, right? But imagine if that's how we treat each other. And part of what I'm asking us to think about is, what are those learned or automatic responses that I need to undo, that I need to retool or retrain? And we're going to get to that in a minute. It also turns out that we are wired sometimes to make unquestioned judgments and to bypass logic. That's how bias functions. In any one of these areas, we leap into our biases, right? And here's the good news about gender bias, and it's kind of cute, but I want you to keep it in mind. Right, if you're ever in a Jewish environment and somebody keeps saying he, talking about rabbis, talking about who the leaders are of a community, I want you to just thank them and let them know that you are that you hear that in a gender neutral way, because he in Hebrew means she, so you're assuming that they're meaning it to be both Hebrew and English, right? And I have found that statement, while cute, and I saw some smiles around the Zoom room, helps people stop and think and say, oh, right, I didn't mean he. I meant whomever, or I meant rabbi, or I meant all leaders, or I meant all community members, right? I thought I saw a hand. Yeah, Shelley, go ahead.
So I know you're coming from a rabbi perspective, but I didn't have the option of hearing the word he, because my mother was very explicit. She went to a bone man, an ear man, an eye man. She didn't say he.
Yeah.
She actually called them by their specialty in her own words.
Yeah.
Whereas my father was a doctor and he didn't seem to have any problem. So I don't know what your parents said at home, but my messages and my friends' parents' messages almost entirely were all about, bigotry,
Mhm.
bias. There was only one family where I grew up that was openly open, and all the other parents didn't trust them. They
Mhm.
were suspicious of them, a Jewish family that were humanist Jews, and they were considered a shanda.
Yeah.
So the
Right.
messages were loud and clear, and they were ingrained. And no matter what I saw around me, it was me that ended up changing the way that my mother spoke. But that deep-seated fear of the unknown, of what someone has not been exposed to, is very hard to overcome among age groups and among people who are there's just so much fear in them.
It is absolutely hard to overcome. And that's why we need to have this conversation, because I don't think it's fair to say it was just that generation that had the fears. We are all people who gravitate towards homeostasis. We gravitate towards what we know. So how many of you are familiar with what a Bosu ball is in yoga? Yeah, okay, so I see a few hands. A Bosu ball is the half dome that has the platform on the top, and you stand on it and you have to use your core in order to keep your balance, right? And here's the thing I think about all the time. I think we are all standing on a Bosu ball metaphorically all the time. We're standing tutoring on the balance of what we know, of what our fears are, of what we need the world to be, of all the inputs from the world that are so much. And part of what we're doing constantly is saying, how do I build my core to be able to hold steady in a world where I could so easily teeter to one side or the other? And by one side or the other, I don't mean the dark side or the light side. I mean just falling over, right? And so part of this, and what you're really getting us to, is what are biases, right? And I'm going to share my screen again. So here, a bias is a personal preference or inclination for or against a person or a group that tends to be unfair or judgmental. Right. So what you were just talking about talking about people by their trade could end up, I'm not suggesting your parents were, but could end up having the same type of bias, right? We make assumptions about who people are by what they do, or we, think of what it means to, if somebody has money or doesn't have money, right? Like we make all kinds of assumptions all the time. And what makes it, sorry, wrong way, unconscious is that we're automatically making associations or quick judgments without awareness, intention, or control. Right? And part of our work is to then say, okay, what do I do with that? And how do I change that? So I want to do a couple of things. First of all, I want to talk about 3 different types of biases, right? One is affinity bias, attribution bias, and confirmation bias, right? The first is affinity bias is where we're wired to prefer people similar to ourselves. That's the exercise we just did, our affinity bias, right? And a subset of that is called horns, where we have one negative feature about someone clouds our judgment about them. Oh, I don't like that, the way that person looks, and therefore they're no good. Or that I found out they don't give to Women's League Torah Fund, and I don't like that. And so we're, I'm purposely using something silly, but it does happen where our affinity bias, because we kind of need them to fit into a certain box like us. Okay, a second type is attribution bias, where we assign judgments to an outcome. We women know this one really well, and maybe we've done it to others without meaning to, which is that when someone has, an example of this is when someone has success, we attribute it to their luck. And if they have a failure, we attribute it to their shortcomings. But it wouldn't necessarily, if we're not being conscious, strike us to say, maybe their success is because of really hard work. Or maybe their failures is because of bad luck. Right? So attribution bias comes when we assume that the outcome for the other person is based on our measure of what they've done or who they are. And the third type is confirmation bias, where I have an initial thinking about someone, and everything they do I use to confirm what I said about them. Right? A person, the term aggressive or assertive comes to mind on this one, right? Someone who speaks their mind, right, might be being assertive, but if I label them as aggressive, everything I see them doing, I confirm is another example of aggression. Right? And there are other kinds of biases too, but you can see where, again, because it's so quick and so automatic and without always awareness, we can come to make assumptions about each other or about ourselves or about other people that we encounter without meaning to. So let me, one more slide I want to show you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I just love how it shows what happens, right? So if you look at the ladder of inference, starting at the bottom, right, I have these observable experiences. I select data from what I observe. I add meaning and assumptions and conclusions and beliefs, and then I take actions. And you can see that if I'm drawing conclusions, then I'm, taking actions based on that without necessarily always thinking about what the filters or the assumptions are that are going into that. So, and by the way, these slides I'm happy to share with any of you, but I think that these all show what it looks like in the moment when we're judging, when we're responding or reacting that might not even be conscious. That's why it's called, even though bias assumes an unconscious piece, there are conscious bias, and we could talk about that another time, but really unconscious bias, because we don't even realize it's happening in real time. So I wanted to stop and see if there are questions, comments, before we talk about, okay, so what do we do with it? What's our practical way to train ourselves out of this? Yeah, Mona, hi.
When we started with that first little assignment where we ultimately said that many of our friends or closest friends, those we would confide in, were very similar in many characteristics, I've made a point of, well, it turned out in my book club, we ended up starting to have the daughters of some of the women.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed even when we were discussing lessons in chemistry, which was a big book all about gender bias, okay? And even the young women who were basically in their 30s who had experienced gender bias, let's say, in their occupations, their whole attitudes were very different. And I've made a point of listening now to my daughters and to these young women who handle the world very differently. They've been very empowered. And I can't say it's entirely because of their parents, but it's
Right.
just that, you know, they're not going to put up with, excuse me, the
Yeah.
crap or that we've
Right.
been through.
Right. I would venture to guess that on this call, because I know many of you, that there are many of you who remember the days when we assumed everyone in synagogues looked alike, and we were a little bit nervous if we saw somebody who didn't look like us, right? If we saw Jews of color, or if we saw Jews by choice, or whatever it was, there was a certain level of distrust that came just from the experiences we've had, some of which were experiences we came by honestly because we grew up with anti-Semitism or other experiences, but sometimes it was not at all based on knowing who the person was that we were talking to right next to us, who was just saying, I'm just like you because I find God in Jewish prayer as well. And I think in some ways that's part of what you're asking and talking about, Mona, which is, right, like our eyes can be open. And the question is how and when and in what mindful ways can we retool ourselves to be thinking so that we're part of the solution, not part of the problem. Again, not with judgment, because I don't actually think anybody wakes up and says, today I think I'm going to be biased against the people around me. But I do think that we all wake up and sometimes live based on our experiences and can't always see the experience of the other.
I'm
Yeah,
finding
Renee.
that they empower me. Is what I'm also
Yes, absolutely. I feel the same way, by the way, about my rabbinical students. I've been doing this for 25 years, and you know, the world has completely changed, and every year I'm learning more from my students in the same areas. Renee and then Jennifer.
Okay, so I have a clarification question and then a quick comment. You mentioned that the bias training is being shared with synagogues that are doing a search. Is this only through the RA, or has this spread to other denominations, sects?
Well, right now, it's through the RA and USCJ placement office.
Okay.
And yeah, I'll leave it at that. And it
Okay,
started,
and
I was doing literally, I can tell you that in the last 3 or 4 years, I personally have done about 60 different sessions like this geared towards the rabbinic search. And then other people started doing them. And now there's a toolbox for people to really engage with even on their own.
That's wonderful. I'm glad it's spreading, because that brings me to my other comment. You know, there was another article about the hostages that were released today. They were the spotters, and because they were women, they hadn't been listened to. And I'm wondering, you know, how do we spread this kind of information and to help other people, or do we just help ourselves and then hope it spreads? So.
Well, I think this kind of conversation is one of those steps. I don't pretend to be an expert in helping the IDF learn how to listen to their women, but I do think that in our world, each one of us has the power and ability to impact the people around us. So sometimes it's like, sorry, I forgot who was just talking about their daughter. Mona was just talking about the younger generation teaching them. Sometimes it's going to be through this conversation with each other. In some circles, I encourage there to be a bias monitor, right? Someone who, or a bias, or a word that if we encounter someone speaking from bias, that it's a safe word that everyone in the group knows we're going to say, you know, to kind of regroup and retool ourselves, right? And one by one, we're going to make this different for people. I have to say, and again, we're living at a time where our larger culture is going to make this work even more important. And by larger culture, I mean Israel, I mean the US, I mean the world, right? Like we need this work, and it can't be just, Women's League has done a lot and changed the world in so many ways, but we need to filter it. beyond just us, right? Yeah, Jennifer.
So I have a question of young rabbis, male or female, going into congregations where they're going to interact with maybe an older generation that has some views about what women should be doing, and the advice or what you do to help them.
Sure. I think it's a two-way street, right? Because I want to train the rabbis, and we're going to get to the practical skills of this. But to answer on one foot, I think it's both a question for the rabbis to say, "Tell me about your life experience that shaped this for you." Right? That is a very different question, and I also think it's the congregation. The people in the congregation have to say, how is my experience mine, but different than the next person's? And how do I not necessarily and both sides have to say, how do I not let my experiences be the only way? So let's jump into the practical ways, because I think there's some skills for this. And again, I'm going to share my screen. So in situation where bias is apparent, what choice do I have? Do I react or respond, right? What do I want to do? And for me, this is about really building that intuition muscle to respond the way I want to, not in a way that's going to shut down the relationship. Because I believe that in almost every case that we're talking about in our communities, especially, that the preserving of the relationship is essential. That doesn't mean that anyone who is experiencing bias has to be a punching bag or has to be willing to be abused. But it does mean that we can think about how we respond and react and what we do. And it's really a three-part: stop, challenge, choose. And that's what I want to show you. Right? So the stop is what's going on right now, right? If I'm the one experiencing the bias, what is going on right now? What's the bigger picture? And how was I feeling before all this happened? Right? I might very well have been, I remember once, I'll just tell this quick story. I was at a local synagogue where there was a young female rabbi, and I was standing and talking to one of my very, very close friends. And the young rabbi came over, and my friend looked at her. The friend was a female. My friend looked at her and said, "Oh, you're so cute. I just love the way you are, like, up there. It's like amazing because you don't look old enough or mature enough to be at that position." And I just froze, right? Because first of all, I have this rabbinic colleague who is trying to create a reputation in the community. I have this friend who I know has a great heart and who would be mortified to think that she had somehow, hurt this rabbi. And I'm thinking, like, oh my God, what's going on right now? I'm mixed between these two. And the bigger picture is like these two people, this was her rabbi saying this to her, and they need to be in relationship. And before that was all happening, I was feeling good about the rabbi and about introducing them and connecting them and feeling like this was going to be, really important. So just almost like being a little bit of an observer for a moment can really help, because then I can say, have I felt this way before? Is this a one-time thing, or is it an all the time thing? And what do I do with it? Because if I just said to that person, "How dare you?" that's not going to be helpful. And if I say nothing at all, then the rabbi is going to feel like, gosh, the women rabbis aren't very supportive of each other. So then I can say, again, what's the challenge is what's going on, what am I feeling, and what am I saying to myself about this person, this situation, and having to challenge myself also, because I may be making some quick judgments based on one experience and what's happening. And is there any other possible explanation? I regularly hear from women in particular how people comment on their dress, on their hair, on their clothing, right? And there are a lot of ways in a lot of environments where that feels diminishing, right? But that last question of, are there other explanations, right? Well, there might be, I don't know about you, but I work hard on my hair. So sometimes, like if somebody's commenting on my hair instead of like allowing me to be a rabbi, that's one thing, right? But there is a way in which, being able to say, is there any other possible explanation, allows us to ask ourselves, what was the intent? What can I put myself in the place of the other person, the person who might unintendedly be showing any bias? And then, Sherry, just give me one more second to just go through the last piece of this, because the next part is to choose. And with choosing, I'm going to, sorry, hold on. What outcome do I want? And what options or alternatives do I have? Am I going to say, how dare you? Or am I going to say, she's worked really hard to be a rabbi? Am I going to say, would you say that to your male counterparts, to male colleagues, right? So basically, how do I transform the bias into curiosity? I have to tell you a quick story, and then Sherry, I'll take your question, right? So years ago, we had a student who was doing, at the same time as doing his work in rabbinical school, was also doing an MBA, when we had an MBA program. And he had asked, and as you heard, I have my MBA and worked in the business world, and he had asked me to be one of the readers for his thesis for that program as well. And this is a student who was trying to finish it was late April, and he wanted to finish his thesis so that he could defend it and finish graduation from the MBA program by May, and had kind of waited to turn in the thesis, and sent it with an email that said, I'd like this to be read by this time, and here's the deadline. And we had a couple of exchanges, and then I got the following email, which is, when I asked you to be a reader, I thought it was clear that I would need you to follow a particular schedule, and would appreciate if you would put aside the time to make this happen. Now, remember, he's not only talking to a rabbi in the school, he's talking to one of the deans, and he's talking to someone who's now doing a favor for him. The wording I just gave you might have been a little off, but it was, pretty clear what he was telling me what to do. And so I asked him to come in, and I said, I want to understand exactly, how that email came about. And I said, if somebody were working for you, is this the way you would address them? He said, no, that would be harassment. And I would, worry that they'd go to HR. I said, okay. I said, if you had asked Rabbi Artson, who is the male dean here at Ziegler, to do something for you, can you imagine a scenario where you would have written him that kind of email? He said, and his face went white. He said, no, of course not. I said, so I want to ask you to think about why it felt okay to write that to me. Right? And notice I was seething inside, but I turned what was bias into some sort of curiosity to both have a different outcome, to name the bias, and actually in this case to teach him a little bit, right? Because I did want to teach him, and it turned out there was good reason I couldn't read the thing when he wanted me to. So that's what we're talking about. How do I, in the moment, stop? And if I'm the one about to say, show bias, how do I say who's in front of me? How can this be different? What was I feeling towards this person a minute ago? Right. And if I'm experiencing it, same thing. How do I name what's going on by actually showing an inquiry as opposed to a fight or flight mode? Right. Because most of the time when our fear causes us to either lean in and fight, like we want to hit someone, or to run away and not deal with it at all. And we've all seen what happens with both of those. They both destroy relationships really easily. Okay, Sherry, go ahead with your question, and then I have one more slide to share with you all.
Yeah, I just, I think your comment about hair and the way you look, I think it works both ways. As a child, I modeled professionally, and had all sorts of very rude treatment about, oh, she's pretty, so she can't be smart, or jealousy. And I've lived with multiple sclerosis for over 40 years now. So like, I almost never put makeup on or worry about how I look, because I'm more concerned that I can walk and that I'm comfortable and I can do the things that I need to do than that I look perfect.
For sure.
So I just think that women especially need to be thinking about it in all ways. Someone that's beautiful doesn't mean that they're not intelligent, and someone who might look like a slob might have a whole lot of other things going on.
Yeah, Sherry, you're reminding me of another shiur I've done that's coming up on the calendar on Queen Esther and beauty and what is real beauty, that the text is really introducing, and there's some dual messages within the story of Esther about that as well. But that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? Because some people look at the perfectly put together woman and make certain assumptions, or they look at the person who isn't put together and make certain assumptions. And that's exactly what we're trying to train ourselves to undo, right? And I want to share with you, this slide is not my own. Oh, did I already shoot? Okay, hold on. I got to open it again because I accidentally closed it. This slide is not my own. It actually is borrowed from people who do this out in the world, but I love it. And it is steps we can take to overcome bias. And it is with the idea of implicit, and the steps spell out the word implicit. Got it? Which I love, because we're saying that it's not so obvious when the bias happens. And also by thinking about these individual steps, the impact could be much greater and implicit than we think it can be. And so here's the share. So the first is introspection. Identify who I see as others and what are my prejudices, right? So we started with the exercise of asking, who are the people like me? But like, we could ask ourselves, who do I see as other, and what are my own unintended biases, right? That's step number one. Step number two is mindfulness. We're going to respond very differently when we have stress or when we rush to an answer. So how do I reduce stress and increase mindfulness and flow my thinking about the person who's in front of me? Right? How do I say, you know what? I don't have to be the first one to speak. I don't even have to speak now. Maybe I need to step away from the situation because now is not a good time and I'm going to respond in the wrong way if I respond now. The third is perspective taking. Consider the experience from the perspective of the persons that I might be stereotyping. Talk to them, right? What's their experience of me, of this moment, of the world, right? How do I understand who they are? Another element, so kind of similar to mindfulness, but slow down and learn to slow down, pause and reflect, plan ahead, and learn more before the interaction to reduce the reflex, right? What's different here than the first one is like doing a little research, right? If I know I'm going to encounter a new group of people, how do I what research do I need to do to know who they are so that I'm aware and I'm equipped to understand more about them? And sometimes it's about asking them who they are. Individuation, right? Evaluate people people based on who they are rather than on affiliation, and connect over shared interests, right? So I used the example of the Jews by choice before, right? We have so much in common, right? Because we're all here to worship the same God. We're all here to celebrate being Jewish. We're all here to live the rituals, and we have more that holds us together than that differentiates us. Check your messaging. Use statements that welcome and embrace differences, right? So I can't tell you the number of times when I hear people using negative language, right? How do we talk about non-Jews? How do we talk about non-egalitarianism? Right? Notice how it's always defined by what we are, and we're not looking at the statements of embrace or welcoming, right? People who join the Jewish community, people who connect to our Jewish brothers and sisters. That's a very different kind of conversation. So check your messaging. Institutionalize fairness, right? Support a culture of inclusion. Identify the blind spots in yourself, in the organizations or the groups that you're a part of. Review images to see if they further or if they undercut stereotypes. I'll tell you a story about that one in a second. And then last is take two. Resisting bias is a lifelong work. You have to do and redo, looking for new ways to improvise. It's not a one-time training and we're just done. This is regular work that you have to do. And I want to just tell you about the institutionalizing fairness. And again, I'm happy to share these. Or if anybody, do you want me to put it back up so you can take a picture of that slide? Yes? Okay. Let me do that for 1 minute first, and then I'll tell you the story. Everybody take out your cameras. Everybody know how to take a picture? It's the function print screen. But again, I'm happy to send any of these. You can be in touch with me. Okay, stop sharing. And then I want to tell you this story, right? So I can't tell you how often we are contacted by people, especially now that we're in our new space, who want to give us Jewish artwork, right? They either have it in their home or someone gave it to them or they're downsizing. And almost every one of those cases, the Jewish artwork they want to give us is the old man with the beard, right, from the 18th century. Maybe if there's other men in the pictures, they're dancing with other men, right? Now imagine for us as a school that celebrates egalitarianism in gender, in sexual orientation, or whatever it might be, that's the pictures people come in and see, right? And I remember on a very personal level, and I'm going to stop with this, for me, one of the biggest challenges when I started thinking about rabbinical school and started thinking about putting on tefillin was the preponderance of male images of people wearing tefillin, and there weren't really a lot of images of women wearing tefillin. And so in my head, right, not for any good reason, because I grew up in the conservative movement and I was at JTS at the time when women started to become rabbis as an undergrad, I was there, right? But somehow the automatic response that I was going to was, that's only for men. So to put up those pictures would have reinforced that exact image that not only the women have to overcome, but it was one of my male colleagues, when he was a rabbi, when I was a student, one of my mentors, now colleagues, who said to me, Cheryl, you don't understand. That picture you're talking about, takes me to the same place it takes you, because it looks like men that I don't know anything about or don't connect with. And I don't look at that person and say, that's a role model for me. That is not a way of denigrating ultra orthodoxy. But it is a way of saying, if that's not the world I'm living in, then to keep reinforcing the messages around that isn't helpful. It's not going to be inspiring or useful, and it's going to reinforce stereotypes. And that's the kind of small but significant changes I think we all have the power and the responsibility to make in creating a different kind of culture and a different kind of world, whether that's in our own Jewish communities or in our own civic communities or in the world at large. So I'm going to stop there and let you ask questions, but I know some people may have to say goodnight. I know it's late in some places, but I want to thank you all for allowing me this opportunity, and I hope that I've turned on some sort of little light bulb for you in some way. Jeanette.
Yes, thank you so much for an incredibly informative workshop. I'd love to keep going. You mentioned that you, besides teaching the gender bias curriculum with the students, that you also do work with search committees. What about veteran, longstanding synagogue staff, not just the rabbis, but the entire staff?
I'm happy to do it, and to do it in your name, because really Women's League is a full partner in this, and I think that would be great. And if you know of synagogues that want to engage in that work, I would love to do that. And perhaps one of the next steps would be to train others to do the training, because we need more people helping with this. So absolutely.
Or synagogues that need to engage in that
Yeah.
work and may not
Yeah.
recognize it,
Yeah.
of which I've experienced recently. Having worked my entire career in the Jewish community, I've had a different kind of relationship within the congregations, but now that I'm retired and in a new community, I've experienced something different.
Yeah.
As
did this-
has the next generation that Mona pointed to, who has no issues within their professional career, but within this volunteer role in the community, is struggling.
Yeah, although I would just say, and it's not just around gender, I think it's true that organizations are a little bit more sensitive out in the real world. But I talk to people in all kinds of professions who continue to encounter bias. And we have to, overcome that. I was once doing a program on prayer with Craig Taubman for rabbinical students. You all know who Craig is, right? Musician, amazing Jewish musician. And he brought with him an African-American storyteller, talent agent, actor, amazing man, Stuart Mattinson. And Stuart told the story that I'll never forget. He said to Craig, like, how many times have you been stopped by the police, right, in your lifetime? And Craig said, well, once or twice when I was actually speeding. And Stuart told us the story about the day he bought himself a fancy car to celebrate his success. And on the first day he had that car, he got stopped 3 times on the assumption that it had been stolen. Right? Now, I'm not saying anyone here stopped him, right? But that's what we're thinking about, right? Because we all have our small little ways that we can be better. We can be more relational with everyone around us. So thank you all. I'm just grateful that you're willing to engage this. Happy to share the slides if you want to email me, cperetz@aju.edu. Or if there's ways that I can be helpful, or you're exploring doing some of these steps and want to have a chavruta, a learner to do it with, I'd be happy to talk further. So thank you.
Rabbi, if you send the slides to me or to Lori, we can make sure they go out to all the participants.
Great, I will do
Absolutely.
that. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank Rabbi Peretz for all of us for joining us tonight and educating us about gender bias and harassment. I'd also like to thank Renee Ravitch for doing our tech tonight and Cheryl for helping with their introductions. We also appreciate all of you coming to our workshop tonight. Please remember to support the Spaces campaign and make your donations. Our goal is to finish creating new spaces by the end of our campaign year, June 30th, and we appreciate your support. Just think about what we learned tonight and what our contributions have gone towards. And you can see that it's been something very worthwhile. We thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.